The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club is easily one of the most famous motorcycle clubs in the world, and its members are often highly revered. While the HAMC openly describes itself as an outlaw club for motorcycle enthusiasts, they have, over the years, proven to be the exact opposite. Reports of drug trafficking, kidnappings, extortions, prostitution operations, and even murder are some of the crimes committed by members. Join me as we witness 5 dangerous Hells Angels reacting to life sentences for crimes they committed. 1. Caius Veiovis.
In just a few short hours, we'll know the fate of the man who was convicted of a triple murder in the Berkshires.
First up is the sentencing of a 34-year-old self-proclaimed Satanist and vampire, Caius Veiovis, who was found guilty of kidnapping, murdering, and dismembering 3 men in the Pittsfield area of Massachusetts. His sentencing took place at the Hampden County Superior Court, with Judge C. Jeffrey Kinder presiding over the case. Caius Veiovis wasn't your regular individual. He had implants in his forehead that resembled horns. He also had 666 tattooed above his eyebrows, ensuring everyone took his Satanist persona more seriously. And there was no missing the spikes in his nose, as well as his heavily tattooed face and body. Veiovis, originally from Augusta, Maine, was born Roy Gutfinski Jr., but legally changed his name in 2008 to suit his new persona. Caius is the name of a vampire in the Twilight series, while Veiovis is a Roman god thought to have escaped from hell. Although this freakishly weird face, as well as his brutal crime, surely got the attention of both national and international audiences, this wasn't the first time Veiovis had made the news. In 1999, he made the headlines after he and his 17-year-old girlfriend, Deanne Jones, were accused of assault. The duo had lured a 16-year-old girl into their motel room, where Jones sliced open the girl's back with a razor blade, and the couple then licked her blood while kissing each other. The girl had required 32 stitches to close the 7-inch gash she had. Now this same man, along with his accomplices Adam Lee Hall and David Chaloux, would appear in court for the murders of David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. In August 2011, weeks before Glasser was to testify in a case against Hall, a Hells Angels member, he along with Chadwell and Frampton, mysteriously disappeared. 10 days later, the dismembered bodies of the 3 friends were found buried outside of Pittsfield. The murders were traced to the 3 men, and prosecutors alleged that Veiovis had helped 37-year-old Hall and 47-year-old Chaloux kidnap and murder the men. His trial was moved to Hampden Superior Court after his defense lawyers said that the extensive publicity of the case in Berkshire County would prevent a fair jury selection. Although he insisted on his innocence, Veiovis was found guilty of kidnapping, murdering, and dismembering the 3 victims. He was also convicted of 3 counts of kidnapping and 3 counts of intimidation of a witness in the killings of David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. Veiovis didn't take the decision of the jury well and flared up in the courtroom.
Yeah, I'll see you all in hell too, and remember that. Every one of you, I'll see you in hell.
Just before his sentencing, Veiovis was allowed to address the courtroom, and he read out a prepared statement where he continued to insist that he was innocent of the crimes leveled against him.
My hand was not in this, and I will not let this hand sell me my own life at the price of my integrity. That I'd rather spend the rest of my life in prison and be able to face myself in the mirror at the end of the day and make that kind of deal.
Judge C. Jeffrey Kinder sentenced Veiovis to 3 consecutive life sentences, each without the possibility of parole, for the murders of Glasser, Frampton, and Chadwell. Veiovis's reaction was not to be missed.
As engaged with 3 counts of murder, impose a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, each one to be served from and after the other.
Veiovis this time had no reactions. He was seen moving his head at intervals. A look of nonchalance registered on his face as the courtroom proceedings went on. 2. Adam Lee Hall.
For the term of life, without the possibility of parole.
37-year-old Adam Lee Hall, a ranking Hells Angels member, was deemed the mastermind of the savage murders of 3 men in Pittsfield. Hall, along with Caius Veiovis and David Chaloux, had brutally murdered David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell to prevent Glasser from testifying against him. According to court records, Hall had beaten Glasser with a baseball bat sometime in July 2009 because he believed Glasser had stolen from him. Glasser then reported to the police, and Hall was arrested and charged with assault and battery by means of a dangerous weapon. A year after, while the case was still pending, Hall, in July 2010, attempted to discredit Glasser as a witness in the case by framing him for kidnapping. Nicole Brooks, a friend of Hall, had made reports to the police that Glasser had kidnapped her, and while she escaped, he shot at her. Another of Hall's friends also planted a gun in Glasser's truck, but the police were able to see through their shenanigans, and this earned Hall more charges. However, Hall was still free to move around, and that was when he started hanging out with Chaloux and Veiovis, who was a Hells Angels prospect at the time. crime. On the evening of August 27th, 2011, Chalu, along with their female friends Alison Skase and Kayla Sewell, were at Vejovis's apartment when Hall arrived with a dog food bag. The bag contained a .45 semi-automatic pistol, a .44 Magnum revolver, and a sawed-off AR-15 type weapon, along with a small revolver. Soon after, Glasser, along with Chadwell and Frampton, were declared missing. 10 days later, their dismembered bodies were found buried in Beckett. Prosecutors believed that the initial plan was to kill Glasser, but Hall and his accomplices had found Frampton and Chadwell in the house and decided to kill the two men to silence them. At his sentencing, Hall had initially refused to testify, but at some point lashed out at the prosecutor when he seemingly made an incorrect statement Hall disagreed with.
Over there at the house on Sunday afternoon to meet
20 miles away.
At first, his lawyer argued that Hall was being specially targeted by prosecutors by repeatedly bringing up his Hells Angels membership. However, the evidence against him was convincing beyond doubt, as Alison Skase testified that she was with the trio on the evening of August 27th, 2011, and had seen them with weapons.
The evidence in the case is not overwhelming, yet it is convincing, clearly convincing, beyond a reasonable doubt.
The jury found Adam Lee Hall guilty of 3 counts of murder, 4 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of witness intimidation, armed robbery, assault, and battery with a dangerous weapon, possession of a firearm, and conspiracy. However, he was found not guilty of 2 counts of witness intimidation, extortion, and kidnapping. As the jury's verdict was being read out, Hall appeared devastated at the plethora of charges against him, and immediately the sentencing commenced.
For the term of life, without the possibility of parole.
The judge sentenced Hall to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As the judge read out his sentence, Hall, who initially appeared devastated at the jury's verdict, didn't betray any emotions this time. If anything, he appeared less concerned about the sentence. Perhaps he was reconciled to his fate. 3. David Chalu.
We are following breaking news out of Springfield, where a Hampden County Superior Court jury has just found David Chalu guilty of all counts. Almost 24 hours after jurors found Chalu guilty of murder of 3 Pittsfield men, only to have the judge void the verdicts because one juror said she didn't disagree. The jury just now reached a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts.
David Chalu was one of the 3 men involved in the murder and dismemberment of 3 men in Pittsfield. A Hampton Superior County Court jury had just convicted him on 9 counts, which included 3 counts each of murder, witness intimidation, and kidnapping. Chalu had been one of the men who kidnapped David Glasser, his roommate Edward Frampton, and their friend Robert Chadwell, and murdered them. At first, there was no evidence that tied Chalu to the murders, and he had, in fact, pleaded not guilty to the crime. However, prosecutors at his trial decided to use the testimonies of jailhouse informants as evidence of Chalu being involved in the crime. One of these informants, identified as Christopher Latalian, stated that while Chalu had been in segregation at the Berkshire County House of Correction in September 2011, they met and discussed the murders. According to Latalian, Chalu had told him, "I got a body. Not only do I got one body, I got 3 bodies. Not only do I got 3 bodies, but I made them disappear. Not only did I make them disappear, but 14 days later, they found them cut up into pieces at the bottom of a ditch." Another inmate named Jason Lemieux also testified against Chalu, saying that they met in October 2011 while still at the Berkshire County House of Correction. Lemieux stated that Chalu had been more than willing to discuss his case and interpreted it as Chalu bragging about what he had done and also intimidating other inmates. He went further by stating that Chalu had described that the victims were tortured beyond torture and cut up and made to disappear. Lemieux also mentioned that Chalu had alluded to being involved with the Aryan Brotherhood and also had an affiliation with the Hells Angels. In 2013, just before his trial, Chalu was moved to Sousa Baronowski Correctional Center, where he met Jethro Kempton, a fellow inmate and member of the Aryan Brotherhood. Kempton was also one of the informants who testified against Chalu at his trial, saying that the defendant had described his role in the kidnap and murder of the 3 victims. According to Kempton's testimony, Chalu had knocked on the door of the targeted victim, and when they had gotten in to get him, they discovered that he had 2 friends over that night. Kempton said Chalu described the murder jokingly, saying, while they were shooting them, one guy ran off in the woods naked. He said he stripped naked and started shooting him. He didn't say who shot who or who ran after who. He just said we had to track him down in the woods. Going further, Kempton testified that the defendant let the bodies, sit for a while so the blood would coagulate, so that when they dismembered them, it wouldn't squirt. After the jury listened to the testimonies presented to the court, they deliberated and came back with a guilty verdict. But when all 12 jurors were individually polled, one juror said she had not come to that decision. This made the judge render that verdict void, as he wanted a unanimous verdict.
The verdicts as read by me, were those your verdicts?
By the time the jury reconvened, they had reached a unanimous vote, which found Chalou guilty of all charges against him. As the jury's verdict was being read, Chalou appeared to be the very picture of nonchalance.
Premeditation with malice aforethought. Mr. Foreman, was this the verdict of the jury?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, was this your verdict?
Yes.
And was this verdict unanimous?
Yes.
Being found guilty of 9 counts, David Chalou, who appeared unperturbed by the jury's verdict, awaited the judge's sentence. Just like his accomplices, Chalou was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole for the murders of Glasser, Chadwell, and Frampton. As the judge read out his sentence, Chalou displayed no emotion, and there was no telling what was going on in his mind at that moment as the judge sealed his fate. 4. Jay Witt.
Prosecutors say 48-year-old Jay Witt will serve a mandatory 22.5 years in prison for killing William Furlong.
Jay Witt, a Hells Angels member, had been found guilty of charges that included manslaughter, use of a deadly weapon, and possession of a deadly weapon by a prohibited weapon. He was to serve a 30 to 40-year sentence for killing a Hells Angels prospect named William Furlong at the Hells Angels clubhouse in Omaha in July 2013.
Authorities say Witt was a member of the Hells Angels and Furlong was a prospective member. Both men were seen on video going into the Hells Angels clubhouse near 27th and J in July 2013, but only the convicted came out.
According to reports, Furlong, a 48-year-old prospect of the Hells Angels, was found dead at a Nebraska Hells Angels clubhouse on July 14, 2012. Authorities who were at the scene of the crime said that he had died from a single gunshot wound. Surveillance video outside the clubhouse showed a man believed to be Jay Witt, who was 47 at the time, at the scene of the crime around the time the murder occurred. However, the police couldn't find him, and a wanted notice was put out to catch the suspect.
Just need your help finding a man wanted for murder.
Take a look at him, 47-year-old Jay Witt. He faces a second-degree charge of murder in the death of 48-year-old William Furlong. Police found his body at the Hells Angels headquarters at 27th and J last month. Investigators still won't say how Furlong died, only that evidence shows someone killed him.
While the search for Witt was ongoing, the surveillance video obtained from the clubhouse proved to be valuable evidence in the case. The footage had captured a man believed to be Witt going into the clubhouse with his girlfriend around 2:15 a.m. Just before 5 a.m., Furlong was seen entering the clubhouse. The footage later showed the man believed to be Witt leaving the clubhouse with the woman around 9:30 a.m. with a plastic bag. The man was also seen wiping down the door and door handles with towels before leaving in a Chevy Cruze that had Virginia license plates. According to prosecutors, Witt and Furlong had been fighting before he shot the prospect. They also alleged that Witt had trashed the clubhouse to make it seem like the murder had been committed by a rival gang. After a month of searching for Witt, he was finally caught and arrested by the police.
For more than a month, police couldn't find him, but today they found a murder suspect during a traffic stop with a gun inside the car.
At first, he pleaded not guilty to the second-degree murder charge against him. However, he changed his plea to guilty, and prosecutors dropped the murder charge. Witt was then found guilty of manslaughter, and this conviction didn't sit well with the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, whose members had recently been in the news for drug dealings, shooting incidents, and gang warfare. Witt was allegedly excommunicated from the club following his arrest, so he was no longer a member of the Hells Angels. In 2014, Jay Witt was scheduled for sentencing at the Douglas County District Court. On the day of his sentencing, Witt was seen walking in, looking impassive and detached, as he was led into the courtroom by a prison guard. Although the court proceedings weren't captured, the judge sentenced Witt to 20 years in prison for manslaughter and another 10 to 20 years for the use of a firearm to commit the crime. This totaled 40 years in prison. The judge said that even though Witt claimed to have shot Furlong in self-defense, there was no evidence of that. He would be eligible for parole only after serving a mandatory 22.5 years, which meant he would be 70 before he is eligible. Although his face wasn't captured at the time when his sentence was read, Witt, seen leaving the court, appeared as undisturbed as he was before the verdict. In fact, there was no mistaking the slight swagger in the way he moved and nodded at someone not captured in the footage. Unfortunately, he would pass away at the age of 53 in the Nebraska State Penitentiary in September 2019. The Nebraska Department of Correctional Services stated that he had been suffering from a medical condition. 5. Zane Power Wallace. Zane Power Wallace, a 31-year-old prospect of the Hells Angels, was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 15 years and 6 months. The sentencing, which was held at the High Court in Wanganui, was to ensure justice for the murder of Jasmine Wilson, a 30-year-old mother of 2, in 2019. According to reports, he had repeatedly beaten her in the months leading up to her death. Wallace and Wilson had a brief relationship when they were teenagers, but eventually went their separate ways. 9 months before her death, the two rekindled their relationship, but Wallace was no longer who she thought he was. Wilson was often seen with injuries, and people even acknowledged that they had seen him assault her at a Hells Angels club. Wallace was also known to threaten her in the most violent ways with these threats, including beating her head in, slitting her throat, kicking her head in, and even splattering her brains on the pavement. However, this assault would become deadly on July 31st, 2019, when Wallace beat her up so badly that she had several broken ribs. The bruised and battered Wilson was discovered by Zane Wallace's father, Stephen Wallace, after he received a call from his son asking for help. He then put her inside a car and called his ex-wife, Leanne Wallace, Zane's mum. She in turn contacted Zane's sister, Stevie Lee Wallace, to get in a car and meet Stephen at the Wanganui hospital where they switched cars. Wilson was dumped at the emergency department of the hospital, but was soon located by the medical team. Her situation was so critical that she had to be moved to Wellington Hospital. On August 2nd, 2019, she finally succumbed to her injuries. Wallace was arrested and a trial was scheduled for 2021. However, the trial ended due to issues with medical evidence in May 2021, and another was rescheduled for 2022. Before the rescheduling, Wallace pleaded not guilty to the murder charge against him. On July 25th, 2022, Wallace pleaded guilty to the murder charge on the day his retrial was supposed to start. He also pleaded guilty to 4 charges of threatening grievous bodily harm, 3 of assault with intent to injure, 2 of threatening to kill, and 1 each of injuries with intent to injure, assault, male assaults female, and demands with menace. Prosecutors also brought up Wallace's long history of violence, especially towards his previous partners. He was also violent to anyone he came in contact with, and had even threatened to kill Wilson's children and her family. Aside from these, he had also attacked another woman and a man on August 24th, 2019, just 22 days after the death of Wilson. At his sentencing, emotions were high, and the courtroom was charged as the animosity between the family of the victim and the defendant could be felt. Additional security had to be on ground at the courtroom and ensured that both families were separated in the public gallery. As soon as Wallace was brought into the courtroom, a loud sob echoed in the courtroom. Things would become more tense in the courtroom when Justice Francis Cook, in charge of the case, sentenced Wallace to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 15 years and 6 months. As the judge read out Wallace's verdict, his eyes behind the mask was one that mirrored resignation. The moment he was being led out of the courtroom, someone from Wilson's family, "I hope you burn in hell," which almost led to a fight in the courtroom, with both families yelling and threatening themselves. Stephen Wallace, Zane's mother, and his sister, Stevie Lee, were also convicted and sentenced for attempting to pervert the course of justice in relation to Wilson's death. These Hells Angels members were some of the most notorious, so it is only normal that they get punishments for the brutal crimes they committed. If you enjoyed this video of 5 dangerous Hells Angels reacting to life sentences, click on the cards on your screen for more exciting videos.